I have not been advised of any extraordinary items. So we come to the first substantive item, COVID-19 briefing and the Auckland Emergency Management status update. Let me just check. I think today we have Ian Maxwell, Mace Ward and Phil Wilson. Phil is in the room here. Mace and Ian, have we got you on the lines?
Yes, we are both together across another building.
Kate's an apology today?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. So, look, yep, we're moving on, and level 2, and I get a morning update at 7:30 from the group controller, and what we're getting is a very clear trend in a decline in numbers for our 0800 number and a declining demand for our food packages. That can, I hope, be seen as a positive move. I think yesterday we were down to 152 calls and only 42 welfare requests, which means that people are now linked in with the Department of Social Development. They're better linked in with their families coming out of emergency level 4. And hopefully a sign that actually many more people are back at work and able to cope. Ian, maybe if I ask you to do an introduction, and then
sure.
Mace and Phil, I think, will both want to contribute to the report today.
Yes. Look, thank you, Your Worship. I think what you've outlined is exactly clear. We are moving towards a recovery situation in just about all aspects that we'll talk about today. So look, I'll ask Mace just to run through what the response situation is, and then I'll talk a little bit about the council, where we're heading. We're obviously welcoming people back into work today as well, and then we'll get Phil to talk about the recovery. So Mace.
Tēnā koutou katoa, Your Worship and members, thank you very much. Just to, the nationwide state of national emergency was lifted yesterday, and we've now got a national transition period which came into force at midday yesterday, and this will remain in place for 90 days unless extended or terminated earlier. So we are now in level 2 and a shift from level 3, as you noted, Your Worship, over last evening, and taking us to a reduced phase in the recovery or response. I'll keep the update this morning brief, given that you've got quite a lot of other business on the agenda. The work volumes do remain high, but we are noticing a shift in that, and I'll talk about that. The Emergency Coordination Centre in Bledisloe House remains active with a team of people across emergency management and other council representatives and our other response agencies in the region contributing. Those that don't need to work from the office remain working at home. We are operating in tandem with other agencies, as I say, but separated from the Emergency Coordination Centre is the Regional Isolation and Quarantine Cell, which is, as you are all, I think, aware, a multi-agency cell responding to managing the needs of returning and departing travellers. There are a similar model operating in Christchurch to receiving returning travellers to hotels in that region as well. In terms of caring for our communities or welfare, the welfare response continues to be the predominant focused response on non-health related welfare needs of Aucklanders and people isolating in our region. We are working more closely with other support agencies, as noted by the Mayor, like food banks, community-led food banks, and MSD, Ministry of Social Development, on a more sustainable long-term solutions for community support. Our welfare food parcel initiative has now been running for 6 weeks, and we've received 33,700 calls to the 0800 number over that time, resulting in 17,221 calls for assistance. As noted, the requests over the last week have totalled for assistance 464. That compares to the first week in the response of where we're getting 5,000 calls for assistance early in the response, and that has continued to halve each week as we've progressed. but we have we've provided assistance to 15,500 households across Auckland over that time. Many Aucklanders are facing challenging circumstances, and our teams, along with our partners, particularly MSD, are coordinating support to connect callers with other services where possible, including other agencies, and particularly I'd acknowledge the community-led food banks and welfare support agencies. MSD are reporting, as we are finding in our welfare desk, more complex needs for those seeking assistance, including health needs, and that includes also migrant families. MSD have noted to us a significant number of new customers and new clients that it has established during this response period, reflecting the fact that the impact on lockdown has been indiscriminate and affected many people in our community. We hope to see that change, of course, now that we're in level 2. I just would also note that our welfare support is available to all residents in Tamaki, including migrants. Ministry of Social Development report this morning that they are also opening their welfare centres, so people will have direct access in a controlled way following hygiene standards. As I mentioned last week, we have submitted our first reimbursement claim to the National Emergency Management Agency for our welfare support. This just does not include staff time and other agencies, but that totals $4.5 million as at last week for the scale of our local response in Auckland to date. That will continue as we continue to support community-led response, and we see a shift, of course, to central government agencies. If I just touch now on the Regional Isolation and Quarantine Coordination Group. As of the 12th of May, there were 2,209 people as guests in our managed isolation hotels and 104 people in quarantine hotels in Auckland. And this total continues to, of course, change daily as people reach their 14-day anniversaries and can return home, and as, of course, new flights arrive into the country. For the move to Alert Level 2, we have taken the opportunity to stand up hotels away from the city centre so that we avoid the increasing occupation of the city centre as people return to work, even in a modest way, at 30 to 50% of what we may have seen before COVID-19. Our Te Pou Whakarai, or Māori response function, continues its outreach program to marae, iwi and mātawaka organisations. They do note, however, that there has been a decrease in the outreach, and that's starting to reduce as well, which is good. And just lastly, on general coordination, Auckland Transport is communicating widely about public transport use under Alert Level 2, including the importance of checking capacity of buses when planning a journey, and particularly the hygiene measures under place. And we note that they're communicating that through a video and on using public transport under Alert Level 2. And I urge you all to take a look at that and share it with your constituents as appropriate. I would also note, it'll be a subject later in this, your confidential agenda, but Auckland Council facilities over 400 are also progressively moving to open, and all parks and public places are available for the community now. So thank you very much. Appreciate your ongoing support for us during this time. Thank you.
Look, thanks very much, Mace. So you'll see actually from also what I'm going to talk about, the general approach is the emergency responses are downsizing, and we're transitioning back to normal, and we'll be carefully managing that, and often that involves a staged process, and you can see that both with the move from emergency response from council to the normal agencies such as government, but you can also see that staged or phased approach within council in terms of our return to work. So we've opened up our offices today, and we're expecting for the first 2 weeks to have around about 30% of the capacity of those offices occupied. I must admit I walked around Albert Street in Bledisloe today. We're probably not quite at 30% this morning, but we'll be building up to 30. And then after 2 weeks, we'll be moving to 50%. And the reason for the 50% is around social distancing, deployment of health and hygiene requirements, and so forth. And the 30% initially was to ensure that we've got those processes in place, that we've got a good way of working, and that concept of operational needs is impacting pretty much all that we do in terms of returning to work. We want to do it in a way that is safe for our people, but also safe for Aucklanders who might be using our facilities. We've also deployed track and tracing. So every person who comes into our facilities, whether they be staff or customers or Aucklanders, will be needing to record some information about them, so that should a COVID case emerge, we can track back who those individuals have been in touch with. Today, you will have seen the announcements around reopening of parks and playgrounds. But look, we have a very large network of facilities, some over 800 or so. It's by far the largest network that any local government unit in New Zealand manages. And it is a complex business to actually reopen those. And it's also affected by staff availability. We still have people within council who are associated with the COVID response. And we also have people who are vulnerable to COVID. So people who maybe a high risk factor, and before those folk come back to work, they need to meet with their managers, and we just need to ensure that we've got a good safety plan for those people. We also need to deploy social distancing, and in situations, some of our public facilities, libraries and so forth, we've got to put in place some fairly careful regimes around that, and also contact tracing in those areas. And then finally, we also have the issue of water restrictions, which I know Council considered at its last meeting. And so some facilities, fountains, those sorts of things are not reopening because of that. So look, I'm not proposing to run through in any detail what's being reopened and so forth. We have an opportunity later on following this meeting around sort of a briefing with respect to that. And I know Claudia will take us through it at that point. But it's also fair to say that we want to ensure that we brief our local board chairs and so forth. They are the governors for many of these local services. And we've got an opportunity to do that more this afternoon. And the intention is to release more information about what's opening once we've had a chance to brief those governors. So look, I'll pass on to Phil, and he can talk a little bit about some of the work that's commencing around recovery. And this activity of recovery will increasingly become more important. We clearly have a government budget being announced this afternoon, and it will have implications, I'm sure, for recovery. And there's also quite a bit of work going on in the central government area about setting up legislation around this as well. So look, if I perhaps ask Phil just to talk through the area of recovery.
Thank you, Ian, and good morning, Mayor and councillors. I mentioned last week that we were expecting clarity about certain responsibilities in the recovery space. Truthfully, that did and didn't happen. As Ian and Mace have outlined, we are in a transition space formally between response and recovery. But there were certain other things that we were anticipating in terms of specific allocation of responsibilities for recovery activity that that we still don't have. There was a national teleconference earlier in the week, and it was made clear at that point that we may not get some of that clarity until after a cabinet meeting on the 2nd of June. it's likely that there'll be an expectation of a regional leadership group and or working group with specific responsibilities, but we don't know that for certain. In the absence of that clarity, we are continuing with our planning and making sure that we're connected in with others who have a responsibility in this space. Specifically, central government has appointed a regional lead in the social sector space under the banner Caring for Communities, and we are connected into that person and that mechanism. We have AT'd in terms of their economic development responsibility on board with us. And we're coordinating internally in terms of any recovery-related activity that council itself might take responsibility for. There are some outstanding questions until we have that clarity from government about specific responsibilities. What is the balance of responsibility between council, government, and community? Who is responsible for what costs in this realm? So it's a little unsatisfactory as we are in this transition space, but nevertheless we're continuing with our planning work. I'll leave it there, Your Worship.
Thank you very much to Mace, Ian, and Phil. Thank you very much to Mace, Ian and Phil. Look, we'll go through in the normal way, I think, amalgamating comments and questions and just asking for people to keep these as brief as possible. We have been taking about an hour and a half over this session, and it'd be good if we can trim a little bit of time off that. So let's run through the list from the top to the bottom. Deputy Mayor Bill Cashmore.
No, good work, team. Keep it up. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Josephine Bartley.
Thank you again for all your work, team, and nothing further from me.
Thank you. Kathy Casey.
Hi, Ian. Can we possibly update on rough splitting? Has it been? I know there was an injection of government funds of $107 million to continue the motel placements. When does that run out, and who's monitoring the current situation?
Right. Who might have an answer on that one?
We're sitting together and we're just debating who might be best placed. Probably Mace.
Okay, Mace.
Thank you, Councillor Casey. So that will be continually reviewed by Ministry of Social Development and others in terms of that ongoing need. But there's a recognition centrally of central government that there will be an ongoing need for that. It runs out when the money runs out, but will be reassessed progressively.
Yeah, what I've heard, Councillor, from government is that they won't suddenly end that, so that you're shuffling people back out on the street, that they will maintain that accommodation for a longer period of time, but how long hasn't been defined yet.
Yeah, apologies, Your Worship. That's right. So there will be a clear handshake to agencies that will be able to provide ongoing support.
Okay. Good to hear. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Collins.
Nothing from me, thank you.
Thank you. I think I can hear Wayne in the background. Wayne, can you turn your mic off, please, or we'll hear all of your conversation, which might be interesting, but not the focus of our activity this morning. Councillor Pipacoon.
Well, thank you for the update, as always. I just wondered if there's any information you can pass on from Auckland Transport about the emergency measures that are in place and what is continued, particularly to provide safety around schools and with reduced speed limits.
Thank you, Councillor Coombe. Not immediately, other than what you are already aware of, that they are continuing to do work around those or those risk sites. But I will ask ATOC if they can provide an update, and we can circulate that following this meeting.
Thank you. I think that would be useful in terms of appreciate that it's kind of being reviewed constantly, but there's no kind of easy way of finding out exactly what's on the ground.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Linda Cooper.
Nothing from me, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Angela Dalton.
Nothing from me, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Chris Darby.
Very satisfied, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Al Filipina.
Just two questions, Your Worship, and I think it's to Ian or possibly Mace. One is how long, has there been a decision made as to how long our 0800 number will be continuing, and if it will continue in the next few months as we've discussed previously, have we put out a release in regards to when that 0800 number will cease? And just to give you some context as to why I've asked these questions is that I'm still getting calls from people who are still obviously having hardship around food especially, and it's yeah, I just want that to sort of get out, so yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Filipina, for the question. In terms of the general welfare support, we are seeing a transition to community-led welfare, which is being supported through the government's Caring for Communities program, funded through Auckland Emergency, or the portal of funding through Auckland Emergency Management, coordinating that funding. We do intend to, the phone calls, as I said, are reducing significantly. However, that need is still there. We will reduce from 7 to 7, likely reduce from 7 a.m. till 7 p.m. to more like 8 till 5 in the future, but we expect the National Directive is still to retain that 0800 number for the foreseeable future, noting that people calling that will be, in some cases, quite a few cases already, referred on to other agencies such as Work and Income, MSD, TPK, other agencies. So we won't be turning that off anytime soon.
So Your Worship, so are we looking at July as a timeline, and is there a release, or has that been put on our website? The fact that it's still continuing.
My understanding, Councillor, is that around the rest of the country, where the calls have dwindled to just a handful, they're phasing out now. But we would phase out, I don't know, maybe over the next 2 to 3 weeks, provided that we've got the other support measures in place to take over. Is that your understanding?
That's my understanding, Your Worship. It'll be a bit longer than that, but we continue to make on our website and under the National Directive that number available and known.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Chris Fletcher.
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Shane Henderson.
No questions. Well done, everybody.
Councillor Richard Hills.
Yeah, thank you all, and thank you all for that massive job. As you know, people have really relied on us and appreciated all the work that has been done under, circumstances and timings that would usually take weeks to set up. So thank you. My concern's probably just a comment around homelessness. If we can continue to advocate to at least keep people where they are until we have some sort of proper place to live, because I would hate for all the work and the gains those people have probably made not sleeping rough to be ruined because we've run out of money. So I really hope the government comes up on that. And the other thing just around, and it's my same comment as always, just with the conversations which may or may not be quite tough in the next few weeks around staffing levels and potential cuts and savings, I just want to make sure that we have enough support for our staff under already intense circumstances, but just while media and other organisations throw a whole lot of concerning stories and criticisms of staff levels and different things while we're trying to sort out our budget. So just want to make sure those things are in place. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Tracy Mulholland.
Kia ora. Thank you. Great work, team. Just one question I've got is, will you be in a position to share similar to Auckland Transport an online video? Because I have found already feedback has been great on that, just as to where we go from here. So maybe a little bit of a summary, if that comes from you, Your Worship, that'd be great. I'm just wondering if there's that opportunity, and I agree with what Councillor Hills was just saying. It does actually help people to engage, and it supports so that there is a level of comfort. So is there an opportunity for, say, a YouTube video clip just to say, here now, this is where we're going and how we're still helping?
Okay. Yes,
nice.
I'm sure, it's Ian Maxwell. Look, I'm sure we can certainly do something along those lines. I know our communications team have been thinking about how we can present the sort of efforts of council and where we're heading. So yes, I've no doubt we can do something along those lines.
Thank you. Councillor Daniel Newman.
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Member Liane Namane. Thank you. Councillor Greg Sayers. Are you there, Greg? We've lost Greg for the moment. Councillor Desley Simpson.
Thanks, team, for your work that you've done over level 4 and 3. Huge congratulations for me, thank you, and no questions.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sharon Stewart.
Yes, just the same. I want to thank you all for all the hard work you've done, but am looking forward to the outstanding questions about what council and government are responsible for the community. So looking forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair David Taipari.
Kia ora, Your Worship. Just to Phil Wilson, really, in terms of the recovery plan, I'm unsure how Māori are going to be engaged through that process, and in particular when he's talking about this potential regional grouping, and also how he intends to communicate with the Independent Māori Statutory Board. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Phil here. We're working that out currently, in truth. We have had a meeting at the end of last week with the Mana Whenua Kaitiaki Forum to discuss expectations in that regard.
And we'll come back to Councillor Greg Sayers.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I had 2 screens open. I clicked the wrong one, so no questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wayne Walker. Wayne, we got you on the line there? We had you before. Okay, come back to Wayne. Councillor John Watson.
Back, can I just check? Was it Ian Maxwell said that council is anticipating 50% of staff coming back to work in Albert Street or Bledisloe? Did I hear correctly on that?
It's Ian Maxwell. Thank you for the question. What we're doing is we've looked at our office, the capacity, if you like, of our office spaces. And given the need to maintain sort of physical distancing between people, we've worked out essentially how many people can fit into an office area, floor space, and we've said we can have 50% of that capacity. So all of our people will come into the offices, but they'll come in under rotation. But on any particular day, there will only be a maximum of 50% of the capacity of that particular office space.
Okay, great. I saw a gentleman from Auckland Transport on 7 Sharp or some such program, and they were urging big employers to look at flexible starting times and to try and essentially make the rush hour traffic a thing of the past. So I'm assuming that even within that 50%, we're accommodating flexi times in terms of starting. I know in normal
Yes,
times,
that's correct. Yes, that's correct. And it's and look, we are definitely part of that process of being able to try and sort of minimise the, if you like, the congestion on our roads. And we know that the bus services and the public transport services, they will not have the capacity that they normally do, and so the congestion on the roads could very well be an issue.
Okay, so just finally, Mr. Mayor, at some point in all this, it would be really good to have some sort of report, a brief summary of how this has all worked for the Auckland Council, because clearly there's real possibilities here in terms of addressing some of these congestion issues Auckland-wide if we come out of this with a different way of doing work. And to date it seems to be progressing well without sort of too many hiccups or problems. And we're a big employer. We're in the city. We've been trialling this. We've been doing this with our staff. There's now perhaps an opportunity at some point to reflect on how it's gone and maybe a new way of conducting business at Auckland Council, not just of the COVID period, but longer term.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I'd certainly endorse those comments. I think that our longer-term objective has to be in the positives that we might have got out of the lockdown period. To give people more flexibility about working from home. People won't want to do that 5 days a week. They do like the social contact. It's great. I've got 3 people back in my office now. It's been very lonely up there by myself. But I think people would appreciate the chance, maybe even if it's for 1, 2, 3 days a week, if it's possible for them to work productively at home, to give them that option and opportunity, and that helps us, of course, with our congestion and our carbon emissions problems. So getting a report back, I've got the Chief Executive in the room at the moment, be good to find out how that has worked and how we can build some permanence into the flexibility of working hours and working places. So thank you for raising that. Councillor Paul Young. Thank you. And coming back to Councillor Wayne Walker.
Yeah, had technology problems, but I've sorted them. So 2 or 3 things. First off, it would be very helpful to have a clear picture for Aucklanders of what the circumstance looks like across Auckland as it goes to the things that we're responsible for, because that's not always that clear, and that's picking up on the comments that other councillors have made around public transport and other issues. The other issue that I've got, just a question, is what is happening in the food distribution space that council is associated with as the council effectively closes down the facility. It has been involved with that, Spark Arena or Vector Arena, and the transition that's necessary for local food banks to pick up. And then lastly, I just want to agree with the comments that John Watson has made, and that's around getting intelligence as to what the new normal looks like, how that impacts on us, and quite obviously that will also flow through into the emergency budget that we're preparing and the long-term plan that no doubt councillors are working on.
Okay, is that a question for Mace or Ian?
So Mace will pick up the question there.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Thanks for the question. So yes, there is a transition from the Spark Arena Distribution Centre. We are providing other grants through the central government's Caring for Communities program and working with MSD to ensure that community-led food banks and welfare organisations are getting that support, and our group welfare manager is working directly with those organisations to ensure that handshake occurs and no one should be left in need.
Do you have a contact there?
So if you spoke to Greg Morgan, our Group Welfare Manager, Councillor Walker, he will be able to give you an update on how we're doing it.
Okay, thank you very much, councillors, and thank you very much to Ian, Mace and Phil for those reports. Sharon Stewart, if I can get you to move that we receive the report and to thank our officers, and I'll second that. You happy to move that, Sharon?
Yep, thank you.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. I declare that carried.